Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here, and welcome to the Naval and Marines group build. So without any further ado, let's get into this video and see what people have submitted. So the rules this time was that the subject chosen was Navy and Marines. So any model kit that is within that sort of theme was suitable to be submitted. So they had nearly 4 months to get it done. So if you're looking at this now, obviously the group build has ended, and you can find out when or what's going on with the next group build down in the description by following the Discord link. But basically, you could do anything with this as long as your base build, as it were, is of a plastic model kit. So let's take a look at what we've got. So straight in, the first one we've got is the plane guy, and this is a F6F Hellcat. He says the kit wasn't too bad in general, the details were pretty good, but the wing was a bit of a nightmare. The kit gave the options with the wings folded, and when they put it together, the wing had a bit of a seam between the outer wing and fuselage, so put some filler on that, and when it was dry and they started sanding it, it accidentally cracked it, so they had to do it a number of times. So although you've obviously had a little bit of a trouble building this one, I think you've done a fantastic job, and I think you'll all agree with me that the paint job is absolutely fantastic as well. And I love those decals on the front with a very angry face. So yeah, a good start to the Naval group build. Up next we've got Shoota DeRouter, which has submitted an RS Models 1/72 scale Nakajima Dave captured by the American Navy. So the idea behind this one is it's now awaiting scrapping as it's outlived its usefulness. The paint scheme is post-war American stars because it's being captured. And as you can see, it's quite worn and weathered because it's already in the process of being demolished. He says the kit was generally okay. A little bit fiddly in regards to getting the struts straight, but seeing as it's being scrapped, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, I like this one because it shows off, you know, if you've got a kit that you didn't necessarily do too good of a job with, and you can potentially make it look like something else. They've used a little bit of modeler's license and a bit of ingenuity. So yeah, well done, Shoota DeRouter. Next one up, we've got Noodle, who is a long-term community member. And this is the Hobby Boss 1/72 scale F-14B Tomcat. He says it's his first relatively new aircraft build, as he tends to do more, you know, props and warbirds. So he's quite proud of it, and to be brutally honest, you should be proud of it because you've got some great paint finish on there and a little bit of weathering as well. Says the build was fun, simple, and the detail was excellent for a £20 kit. A little bit of filler was needed with the fuselage, and the wings were assembled upside down because the instructions weren't particularly clear, and the canopy was cracked in a small place, but with some patience and tweaking they managed to fix those issues. The range of decals and detail included in the kit is great, as it has 3 schemes, and he would recommend this kit to a new modeler. And I think you've done a brilliant job. You know, for someone who's gone from doing warbirds and props to moving on to jets, the techniques are going to be ever so slightly different. I mean, they are quite cross-transferable, but, you know, it can be a bit of a learning curve, and I've found that as well in time. But yeah, great submission. Let's move on. Now we've got a couple of submissions from Ewan. The first up is a 1/48 scale Mark 17 Seafire, and this is from Airfix. It served with 800 Squadron based at How Far in Malta or HMS Triumph in 1947. He says the wings were quite difficult to position folded as there are no locating holes, otherwise it's a decent kit. And he did a little bit of an oil wash on this and it looks pretty good. And the radio, he says, was also scratch built. So yeah, well done. I'm particularly impressed with this kit. I can't say that I've ever built an Airfix Seafire, but it looks, you know, quite attractive with its wings folded. It's certainly a little bit more interesting than having it just sort of standard with the wings out flat. So let's take a look at the next one from Ewan, and this is a 1/72 Dassault Super Étendard from Airfix, serving with number 17 Flottille French Aéronaval in 1989. Says the fit was okay and there was almost no flash on it, especially as you bear in mind that this is a kit from the 90s. He says it was quite a quick build, but he forgot to add nose weight, and I feel your pain because I am forever forgetting to add my nose weight. So to sort of compensate for that, eagle-eye viewers might be able to spot that there is a little bit of clear sprue propping the nose up from the tail so that it doesn't fall over. But yeah, good job on this one, Ewan. And the third submission from Ewan is a 1/72 Hawker Hurricane Mark 1. He says from Edward/Armour Hobby, so I presume it's like the reboxed version. And this aircraft was operated by the Royal Navy Fighter Squadron in 1941. Says the build was fairly easy with almost no fit issues, and he decided to remove the carrier film from the decals, which went better than expected. Only a few scratches occurred in the decal when he was applying them, and he decided to weather the aircraft heavily as though it had gone through, quite a few different hands, and it's been, in combat. So he added red patches to the little fabric areas where supposedly it was to represent repaired bullet holes. So I like what you've done there. I like, again, the ingenuity that you've come up with. In the future, maybe with a bit more practice, you'll get a handle on getting a nice smooth paint finish. So I can see a few little brush strokes on some of your previous models as well, but generally very impressive work, Ewan. Okay, up next we've got Ollie. And this is the new Airfix 148 scale Chipmunk T10, and this is of the Navy Wings historic flight. This aircraft is based at Royal Naval Air Royal Naval Air Station, Yeovilton, along with the two Sea Fury, Sea Vixen and Swordfish, and those are all run by the Historic Flight and the Navy Wings charity. He says this is a good model with a lot of detail. The only problem was the decals with the tail number. It just ripped and folded over on itself. Otherwise, he says it's a very fun and enjoyable build. He's opened up the engine cowling and has the canopy half open with the pilot in the front seat as if they're about to start it or run an engine check. He says he's very pleased with this model and he thinks it looks great. And I would be inclined to agree with you, Ollie. It does look very impressive. And I love that you've done a little display base like how I did a few years ago when I made a video about using cardboard and a little bit of flock. So yeah, very impressive model indeed. Let's move on. And it would hardly be a group build video if I didn't take part in it. So this is my Mr. Craft Fairy Fulmer. It was used during Operation Torch by the Royal Navy in 1942. United States Air Force roundels were used to try and prevent the Vichy French from shooting them down, and also to try and encourage ground troops on the ground not to shoot down British planes, because the British, French, sort of Italian, all of those roundels look very similar. So it was an attempt to make sure they didn't get shot down when they weren't supposed to. Well, not that they wanted anyone to get shot down at all. So generally, I didn't find this kit to be too bad. It's a Mr. Craft kit, and I know a lot of people go, oh, Mr. Craft, those are some of the worst. I think this is probably the best Mr. Craft kit I've ever built. Naturally, Mr. Craft don't actually own any of their own toolings. They sort of rebox pre-existing ones. So I think this was a Vista tooling previously, but there were a few small fit issues, but generally it wasn't too bad. The decals were a bit poor, but I managed to sort of save them and use them anyway, and I sprayed it with Tamiya acrylics. And a build video on this model will, at some point in the future, be uploaded to my channel, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Up next, we've got Joesoe, and he's presented an Italeri B25 Mitchell in 1/72nd scale. It's modified to be a PBJ by adding custom PBJ colour scheme, decals, and torpedo/bomb bay. He says the kit is quite nice to build, but unfortunately it features raised panel lines, so I presume it's quite an old model. The kit was airbrushed with Revell acrylics, and the sonar dome was made with a Revell P51 drop tank, so again using a bit of ingenuity to represent the model that you want to. The torpedo was made of plastic card, steel rod, and a thruster from a Revell Bismarck in 1/700 scale, and it was brush painted with acrylics. The bomb bay was made of plastic card and coffee stirring sticks, and he says he's very pleased with the result, especially as he's not done this much scratch building on a kit before. So you've probably done considerably more scratch building than I would have done, and to be brutally honest, I think you've taken your original model and converted it into something else, which, as I've been saying this whole time, it's taking a subject and then getting a way to find and fix it into sort of the scheme that you want it to be in, which I think is great, and modeler's license should be used quite heavily. So yeah, fantastic work on that one. Up next, we've got another submission from Joesoe, and this is the Revell 1/700 scale HMS Ark Royal and HMS Eskimo Destroyer. And he says the fit on these was pretty horrible, but they turned out okay. They were brush painted with Revell acrylics, and the stand was upgraded to fit a nameplate as well. The rigging on the Eskimo is fishing line, and he made folded wings on some of the Fulmers and stretched some clear sprue to recreate the Fulmer taking off as if it's going on patrol. He says he's quite happy with the results here, and to be brutally honest, you should be, because you've done a good job. I have got one of these in the stash, and I am as yet to start it, but I will have to keep an eye out for those fit issues that you mentioned. So moving on, we've got Archmagos Dominus Niveron, and he's presented a 1/72nd scale midget U-boat by Special Hobby. It was an out-of-the-box build, and he says the fit was okay, and it does even come with some interior details. This is the smallest combat submersible with a crew of 1, and its offensive capability was used in World War II by the Kriegsmarine, and it harassed Allied supply lines or deployed naval mines. The kit comes with 2 torpedoes, but it doesn't come with naval mines, so if you wanted to have those, you'd have to do some scratch building or something. The submarine is painted as one of the suggestions on the box as part of K Flotille 263 stationed in Norway. And yeah, great job on this one. I particularly like the decals on the front, which give the sort of teeth sort of vibe. And bearing in mind you've got these 2 torpedoes either side of it, it does show how small the craft actually was. So good job on that one. Up next we've got another submission, which is the Aichi M6A1 hydroplane bomber from the Imperial Japanese Navy. This is the Tamiya kit, and it's in 1/72nd scale. This was used and launched from the I-400 class submarine carrier and was intended to perform hit and run missions against the mainland USA. And apparently one of the targets was supposed to be the Panama Canal, but it never happened. Apparently there is a surviving example in the Smithsonian's Air and Space exhibit. He says this is an out-of-the-box build, but he does feel a little bit disappointed that you can't model the plane with its rear machine gun deployed. And as it's a Tamiya kit, he says he didn't have any real issues to speak of. And yeah, you've done a great job on this one. One of the good things about having a group build is that it allows people to build something that they wouldn't necessarily normally do. And we've had some very interesting submissions so far of some, sort of unique or individual subjects of models which may not have been submitted if we'd done something a little less interesting. Up next we've got Fenris Hunter 500, and we've got quite a few from him actually, so we'll whiz through these. We've got the Grumman F6F 5K Hellcat target drone. This was flown by the United States Navy. The kit here is a Hobby Boss 1/72nd scale. It took him about 2 days, so about 13 hours in total. So he converted this kit into the drone version by extensively painting it in that scheme. Apparently many surplus Hellcats were converted into these drone aircraft, with radio control equipment being added into the cockpits of the planes. They were then painted in high visibility colours, including reds, yellows and orange, and many had the tail section coloured in extra colours such as blues, greens and even pinks. He says the kit itself was a breeze to put together, however it had not much in the way of cockpit details. He says the shallow panel lines were a little bit frustrating, and it wasn't until after he'd done all of the gloss coating etc that he realised that the washes and things wouldn't necessarily sit in them because they were so shallow. The decals that were applied were just spares that he had lying around, so it's a little bit of a fictional aircraft based upon a real thing. So yeah, I think despite the issues you had with the shallow panel lines, you've done a good job of this one, and it is a very interesting and eye-catching scheme. Up next we've got a Spitfire from the same person, and it's not actually a Spitfire, it's a Seafire Mark 1B, which apparently was the same as the Spitfire Mark 1A. But interestingly, the Mark 1B Seafire retained the Mark 1A machine guns, whereas the Mark 1B Spitfire had cannons. So a little bit convoluted, but yeah, it's basically the same aircraft painted up in Royal Navy scheme and with an arrestor hook added on the bottom. Again, I particularly like this because it's showing a little bit of initiative. Up next, same person, we've got a nice little diorama. This depicts 14 Trumpeter 1/700 scale F4U Corsairs in a diorama of VF-17 Jolly Rogers at the Solomon Islands airstrip. He says this was a bit of a challenge for himself, it being such a tiny scale, to try and get it all sort of working together. He says the base is made from pink foam with balsa wood around the outsides and a bit of sculpt a mould on the top. He then added grass and painted the beach in a sand colour. One of his favourite parts was making the palm trees, where he used some stretch sprue and printed off some fronds on paper, and while the sprue was still warm, he bent the trunks into various positions to make them look real. And I would agree with you. I do think that this looks very impressive, especially as it will be such a small model. I love that you've got your aircraft ready to take off and even got that one just nosing its way into the air there. So yeah, thanks for sending that one in. And we've got another one which is from the same person. This is the USS Enterprise. And I can see that you've repeated some of your techniques from the previous one where you've got your plane taking off with a little bit of sprue on the end. But what is particularly impressive is that water base. He says that he used tin foil, which was randomly crumpled and glued onto pink insulation foam, and then a layer of white glue was painted onto everything, so a non-wrinkled sheet could be stretched over all of that and then pressed in to keep most of the contours. It was then painted in sort of suitable colours to make it look like the sea, and then the tops picked out to make it look like the foam. But yeah, so I might have to try and do something like that in the future when I get round to doing some more ships. And then the next one from Fenris is his sort of display of Corsairs and Zeros dogfighting in his room. So we've got a variety of different models here. We've got 1/48 scale Corsair and Zero at the front, and then it progresses on back to 1 to 144th scale at the back to give sort of a forced perspective kind of thing. And the intention here was to use aircraft that depict potentially a battle around Okinawa, but after the Guadalcanal campaign. He doesn't know if it would be particularly historical, but it doesn't really matter because it's quite cool to have something like this hanging up on his ceiling. And as you can see, he's added on the front there, the Zero that's on fire. He used some cotton wool and some paints to do that. So yeah, thanks for sending them in, Fenris. And we'll have a look at our next submission from Rorex, who sent us in a Naval Blackburn skewer in 1 to 72nd scale. It looks to be a fairly out-of-the-box build to me, and I would say that you've done a good job. Those decals are neatly applied, and the paint scheme is very nice as well. Perhaps you'll add a little bit of weathering on the next one. Up next, we've got Argonaut 248, who has sent in the Naval Type 21 U-boat with interior. I've got one of these in the stash, and I haven't yet been brave enough to make a start on it, so it's good to see what someone else has done with it. He says it was quite a nice build to do, but it was a bit fiddly at times, and this is the second ever kit that he has airbrushed. And to be brutally honest, it looks really, really good. We have got another submission from Argonaut 248, which is the PM Models Spitfire 5B float plane in 1/72nd scale. Said there was a few fit issues with the wing and floats, but generally the decals were okay. And this was his first attempt at airbrushing the camo, and yeah, I think you've done all right. There is a little bit of sort of paint bleed on the bottom right picture. You can see between the yellow and the camo on the top, but you know, it's a learning experience. We all have to make those mistakes to identify where we've gone wrong and move on the next one. I actually did go and buy one of these kits when I saw it in the shop. I think it's because I saw what you'd done here, and I was like, oh, well, I kind of want one of those as well. So yeah, again, inspiring other models by seeing what you have done. Up next, we've got Thaisen, who sent in an F5E in 1/72nd scale in the colours of the MiG-28 from Top Gun. So in real life, this aircraft was flown by the US Navy, which is how it fits into this group build, and you know, I said it was okay, even though it is technically a fictional scheme. He says the build went together, it was almost perfect. The original top of the fuselage with the kit didn't fit properly, but he had a replacement part for that one included in the box, so there were no issues. It has a minor inaccuracy in the back wheel wells, which was most likely done to make it possible to do the landing gear raised. And the second fitting issue he had was with the nose cone, which was an easy fix by removing the locating pins. He said there was another gap behind the cockpit, but he didn't bother filling that one in. Generally, he's quite happy with how this one has gone together, but he's not sure that it would be worth the €40 plus price tag that it normally carries. He was fortunate enough to get it for half of that, so it was worth it for him. And it is a great looking model. I love the glossy black paint scheme, and you've picked out all of the panel lines with a lighter colour wash, and you've put it on a little display base. So yeah, well done, and thanks for taking part. We've got New Matt next, and this is a diorama. It is the HMS Prince of Wales on a calm sea. It's a brush painted model in 1 to 700 scale from the Tamiya Waterline series. The water was done with paper and PVA glue, The wave tips are cotton wool and a varnish layer was applied to make it look wet. This is his first ship and the first diorama he's ever done, so he's happy with the results. And yes, you should be happy with the results because it's a very good looking model. I imagine that doing water style bases is quite a tricky thing, so it's going to sort of take practice, isn't it, over time? And it's something that I haven't yet had the nerve to do. Moving on, we've got Blackadder 261, who has sent in his Airfix FG1 Phantom in 1/72nd scale. Initially ordered by the Royal Navy in 1966 to replace the Sea Vixen, the RAF and Royal Navy both used Phantoms. The version he's got here was from 892 Naval Air Squadron, and the particular scheme here is where she was used with some cross-deck training with USS Saratoga, where she was effectively vandalized by some United States sailors, where they added some new painting onto the sides of the aircraft. He says the kit was the first one he's ever used an airbrush on and learned a lot in the process. There's a few areas he's not that happy with. Some of the seams aren't quite filled right, and the flash on the left side of the tail was damaged during weathering, as the varnish wasn't apparently not properly covered and it sort of reacted. But generally, I think you have done an amazing job of this one. We've got some nice subtle weathering and the painting is very neat as well, and you know, those decals are really nice too. Up next, we've got T.S. Man and we've got Beaver Chicken, and they've both done the exact same model, which is Hasegawa's Lockheed S3A Viking in 1/72nd scale. But I'm just going to flick between both of them because I think this is a good chance to see how some people, even though you can present the same model kit, will complete it in two completely different ways. So yes, they're the same kit and they've used the same paint scheme, but I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to spot the differences between the two modelling styles and sort of the way these people have tackled this particular model. And this is what I love about modelling. It's not just about getting a kit and finishing it. It's about expressing yourself. And also I think it shows, you know, what different products can do, because T.S. Man has used AK Interactive paints on his, whereas I'm not sure what Beaver Chicken has used on his one, but I don't think they were the same because they've got a slightly different finish. So yeah, two very impressive models of the same subject, and I'm glad that you guys managed to send them in. Up next, we've got the Average Canadian Guy, and this is the ICM 1/48 scale 87 Navigator. This is built in the Royal Canadian Navy markings, and it was used as a trainer in the early 1960s. He says everything that could go wrong during the build did go wrong, but he's happy with how it turned out in the end. And to be brutally honest, I wouldn't have been able to tell that anything had gone wrong because it does look really good. I love that you've got some sort of oil streaks on the lower sides down there, and the painting is really neat and the decals are neatly applied. Let's move on to William. He has sent us in a Hawker Hurricane. This was from the Airfix Battle of Britain Memorial Flight set in 1/72nd scale. He thinks the tooling is from around the 1980s, and the detail is all sort of raised. He did do a bit of rescribing of the details and it turned out quite well. And the model depicts a Sea Hurricane of 835 or 835 Squadron from HMS Niveron in 1944. I think that's how you pronounce it anyway. He says generally the kit, despite being quite an old tooling, was on the whole not too bad. There were no major fit issues and not much cleanup to be done. The hardest part was rescribing those panel lines and things. He says in the future, or if he'd had more time, he would have definitely made a diorama, but you know, that's all that he managed to do for this group build. And to be brutally honest, that's more than enough because it looks absolutely great. Let's move on to this next submission, and this is a Naval HMS Ark Royal Aircraft Carrier and the HMS Eskimo. I think we already had one earlier, and like I said, I've got one of these in the stash, and you can see again, it's done ever so slightly differently to the previous one. He says that both of these are brush painted, and he used a piece of clear sprue to recreate an aircraft taking off from the deck of the carrier. I know ships can be quite hard to do, and I think you've done a good job of this one. Up next, we've got Jim Jam 149 with another carrier. This is the USS Enterprise from Naval. Says the kit was pretty tricky as it came with a lot of flash and had poor fitting. It required a lot of sanding and a lot of glue. Again, it was Jim Jam's first ever attempt at a ship and wasn't too fussed about it being accurate or historical, and it was mostly just for fun. Everything was hand painted, and there wasn't any masking tape, so we had to do some things by hand, and it was a little bit wonky, but to be brutally honest, I think that's fine, because, you know, we're all learning and we're all improving. He's depicted a phantom taking off and one doing a flyby, so if you're careful, you might be able to spot those. And there is also an A4 Skyhawk landing, which again, he went down the road of using some clear sprue. A ocean diorama was made with tissue paper and watered down PVA, and then once it was dried, it was given a healthy coating of blue paint. And again, I love seeing the ingenuity that people are coming up with in this group build. Moving on, we've got joesoe, and this is a light SEAL support craft used for about 2 or 3 years during the Vietnam conflict. In 12, it says between 12 and 16 units for the Navy SEALs. So it's a landing craft here, and I think, judging by the weathering and the addition of, like, I don't know if it's camouflage or if it's debris, but it is possibly sort of been abandoned. So it is, again, a very interesting looking model to have on your display shelf. Up next, we've got a second submission from Cash, who has sent in the Hella 1:150 scale La Sirène, which was an 18th century French 40-gun Coquille class frigate. He says he mostly used spray paints for the big pieces and brush painted the small parts and details. The rat lines are made with black string, and he says it was a hard kit to build. It's an older version of the set, and some parts were bent and the instructions had some errors. The fit was also horrible on some of the parts, so a lot of super glue and some putty were needed. Yet he still loves the details on the stern and bow, and you know what? This has got some intricate details on there, and you have done an amazing job of making them look so neat and tidy. So, well done. Kirovskie Crab has sent in a 1/72 scale Airfix Grumman duck in Argentinian Navy colours. This is a 1960s tooling kit, but he didn't need to use any filler. Just had to do a bit of sanding. The upper wing took some trial and error to align, and biplanes, there always usually is an issue with getting the top wing and the bottom wing lined up properly. But he says overall he's very happy with it, and you should be, because it is a very attractive looking model with a great paint finish, and those transfers are very neatly applied as well. And that, as they say, is that. That is everything that was sent in for this Naval and Marines group build, and which one did you like the best? Let them know down in the comments. For me, I'm particularly liking the fact that people have used their imaginations and their ingenuity, and I don't really think this time around I can actually pick any one model that I liked any better than any of the others. So if you'd like to take part in a future or a current group build, you can check out the link for my Discord server in the description. Currently, we have got a War in the Desert group build running. However, obviously, if you're watching this after sort of June 2022, that will have ended, and we might be moving on to something else. But for full information, take a look at that link. Before I sign off, a quick mention to my Patreon supporters and my channel members. Massive thank you to these guys for the extra support they give the channel. And again, you can find out more information about how you can get involved down at the description box. If you're new here and you'd like to see more of this type of stuff, or get involved, make sure you've clicked that subscribe button and turn notifications on. Leave a like and a comment to make sure that the algorithm is pleased. And I think finally, the last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I will see you on the workbench again next time.